Namaste. Today we're going to be speaking about the topic of yoga in the Bhagavad Gītā. Yoga, no doubt, occupies a central place in the Bhagavad Gītā and is one of the fundamental constituents of its structure. The Bhagavad Gītā is famous for presenting four types of yoga: karma yoga, jnana yoga, ashtanga yoga, and dhyana yoga. Ashtanga yoga or dhyana yoga and bhakti yoga. As the yoga systems of karma, jnana, and bhakti are discussed in different sections of this work, the present chapter is engaged with dhyana yoga, which in many ways resembles Patanjali's classical yoga system. However, the term yoga in the Gita has a wider application, wider than its application in the classical Patanjali yoga system. For example, each of the 18 chapters of the Gita has traditionally a Sanskrit title that includes the word yoga. The such chapter 1 is called the Yoga for Arjuna's Dejection, Arjuna Vishada Yoga. Chapter 2, the Yoga of Analysis or Sankhya Yoga, and so forth. Another such example may be found in the phrase Yoga Meishwaram, which the scholar Robert Minor translates as Lodi Yoga, or the phrase Yogeshwar, translated as the master of mystic power. The Gita's chapter 2 provides two direct definitions of the term. As such, yoga is definitely defined as equanimity and skill in action. I mentioned that before, yoga, karma sukho shalam. Edwin Bryant, an important scholar of the yoga tradition, recognizes a close link between the Yoga Sutra and the Gita, and he writes that the Gita devotes a good portion of its text to the practice of yoga, which it already considers to be ancient. From the Gita's point of view, the yoga is ancient. Indeed, Krishna presents himself as re-establishing yoga teaching that had existed since time from primordial times, while the Gita tends to use the term yoga interchangeably with karma yoga, and the text focuses primarily on karma yoga, jnana yoga, and especially bhakti yoga. The techniques of Patanjali and type yoga are outlined throughout the entire chapter 6, albeit subsumed under devotion to Krishna. The Gita refers to this type of practice as dhyana yoga, as did most early Indic text. So this lecture takes the Yoga Sutra as a point of departure, highlights its similarities to dhyana yoga, and argues that the Gita not only maintains similar views, but expands and elaborates them. As opposed to the very concentrated and internalized mode of yoga articulated in the Yoga Sutra, themes and ideas that are described in the Yoga Sutra in a concentrated sutra style receive a more elaborate description in the Gita. These core doctrines are expanded and present in all other three yogas paths, that is, karma, jnana, and bhakti. As such, a study of these core yoga concepts, such as the ladder principle, mental restraint, or samadhi, is required in order to understand the other three paths presented in the Bhagavad Gita. So I hope you see my point that we have to understand the structure of the Yoga Sutra in order to understand the yoga of the Bhagavad Gita. The yoga also plays a major part in the Gita's metaphysical structure, as it is the underlying ideology and doctrine of the second story, meant to connect the lower humanistic story to the higher liberated story, yoga as the intermediate story of the metaphysical structure of the Bhagavad Gita. As such, it has two main functions, which are practicing detachment from the lower and humanistic level of existence and practicing attachment to the higher and liberated platform. Following that, this chapter argues, or this lecture argues, that yoga occupies not only a central role in the Gita's metaphysical structure, but underlies an ethical yoga ladder similar to Patanjali's famous yoga ladder. As such, the Gita may be designated as a major yoga text. The underlying yoga ladder structure is exemplified twice in the yoga ladder present in chapter 12, and then in the major yogic structure underlying the Gita, which is a karma yoga ethical ladder, similar to Patanjali's famous yoga ladder. This ladder also has stages leading from ethics to liberation, but as opposed to Patanjali's yoga ladder, which is based upon dhyana or Ashtanga types of yoga, the Gita's ladder is based upon kriya or karma yoga. So this is a major argument of these lecture series, that just as you have the yoga ladder of Patanjali, yama niyama, and so forth, similarly, you have a karma yoga ladder underlying the Bhagavad Gita. We may now look more systematically into the yoga of the Bhagavad Gita. So now we will look at the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita and see how the 6th chapter is establishing the idea of a ladder, of ascending the yoga ladder. So I'm sharing screen and reading a little. Yeah, now this is from the 6th chapter. I'm sharing screen. For the sage desiring to ascend the yoga path, action is said to be the means, whereas for him who has ascended and reached the height of yoga, extinction of external activity is said to be the means. So here you see the point that at the beginning of the yoga path, action is adhered to, whereas in the later advanced stages, action is relinquished. So the lower stages of the yoga ladder are active and external, and the higher steps of this ladder are contemplative and internal. So now let me quote Edwin Bright from his translation of Yoga Sutra about the Patanjali's ladder. The 8 limbs are abstentions, observances, posture, breath control, disengagement of the senses, concentration, meditation, and absorption. That's the famous yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. So here are the terms. I will not turn. Okay, yama abstentions, niyama observations, asana posture, pranayama breath control, pratyahara withdrawal of the senses, dharana concentration, dhyana meditation, and samadhaya absorption. Okay, let's move further. So now let us look at the 10th verse of the 6th chapter, and that speaks about the yogi entering a meditative state. 6:10. The yogi should be constantly absorbed in self-contemplation, in solitude and alone, self-controlled, without desire and without possessions. He should establish himself a firm seat in a pure place, a seat neither too high nor too low, and should cover it with a cloth, a deerskin, and cushion grass. There in that seat, he should focus his mind on one point, controlling his mental and sensual activities, and practice yoga for self-purification. Holding his body, head, and neck erect and motionless, fixing his gaze on the tip of his nose, not glancing aside, in a state of deep serenity, his fear gone, fixed in celibacy, mind subdued, his consciousness fixed on me, that's Krishna speaking. He should sit absorbed and contemplate me as the Supreme. In this way, as the yogi absorbs himself in yoga with a controlled mind, he achieves peace, complete extinction, and union with me. So this is a description of a yogi entering yoga posture and meditation. If you look at this deeper, we can see that a brief exposition of the yoga system is offered here. The description includes terms familiar from the Yoga Sutra, such as asana, sthira, ekagra, and chitta. And also we have here some resemblance of Upanishadic, such as the Shvetara Upanishad terms, but I will not mention all the terms, but all I'm saying is that if you look closely at the text, you can see here various phrases which are central to the yoga tradition. Now, let's look at the pivot, the central component of the yoga system, which I argue is its central component, and that is the mind and its restraint. There are, of course, various yoga systems, and they all require mental restraint and the pacification of consciousness. Moreover, to a large extent, the restraining of the mind is at the heart of the yoga practice. As such, the Yoga Sutra opens with this fundamental idea and states that yoga is the stilling of the changing states of the mind. If you like, Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha, that's the beginning of the Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. So this is the center, the base, the heart of yoga practice, this sense, mental and sensual control, this Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha, restraining the consciousness. And here we can see that the Bhagavad Gītā speaks about this principle in the 6th chapter very clearly. And now I'm sharing screen and showing verses 6-5 onwards. One should use his mind to raise himself and not to degrade himself. For the mind is indeed one's only friend and one's only enemy. For one who has conquered the mind, this very mind will be his friend. But for one who has failed to do so, his mind will be his bitter enemy. So you can see that also in the Bhagavad Gītā, the mind, manas, is considered to be at the center of yogic practice. The mind can raise one, and the mind can also degrade one. The mind may be one's best friend, and the mind can also be one's worst enemy. One who has conquered the mind, for him or for her, the mind will become a friend. But for one who has failed to conquer the mind will be his or her bitter enemy. So here we have a very interesting discussion which looks into the mind and its control. As restraint and purification of the mind are at the heart of the yogic method, a great effort is invested by the practitioner to achieve that end. The researcher Ian Witcher looks at the structure of consciousness in the yoga tradition. Accordingly, Sankhya posits analysis of human awareness, buddhi vritti, or mental processes that yoga more or less incorporates, and that involves the principles, tattvas, of prakriti. Anyhow, I will skip that, and let's look at the Gita's recommendation, how one should control the mind and struggle with it. So this is 6:24. Casting aside all desires arising from worldly intentions, he should subdue completely the combined senses through the mind. Little by little, shanei shanei, should he bring his mind to rest. While firmly controlling his consciousness, he should fix his mind on the self, contemplating nothing else. From whatever and wherever the flickering and unsteady mind wanders, it is to be restrained and led back into the control of the self. That's a very central yogic principles, yato yato nischarati, manas chanchalam astiram, tatastato niyam yetad, atmani eva vashamna yet. The mind wanders, and one should bring it back and restrain it under the control of the self. So this is at the heart of the yoga of the Bhagavad Gita, this restraint of the mind, this constant effort to control the mind and to struggle with it, fight with it, if you like. So this endeavor required from a yogi designed to restrain his mind appears to be no less than a fierce battle. According to the yogi concept, the mind is perceived as a subtle organ that regulates the activity of the senses and passes the impressions gathered by the senses to the intellect and thence to the soul. Emotions, thoughts, and desires all are within the functions of the mind. And in contrast to the intellect, which analyzes information and reaches consistent conclusions, the nature of the mind is stormy and capricious, chanchalam, and its proximity to the senses fills it with incessant desires, a continuous stream of thoughts and numerous different feelings, culminating in attraction and repulsion. So, yoga compares the mind to a stormy ocean that is agitated by sensations, perceptions, emotions, images, ideas, and values. One identifies with the state of the mind and absorbs whatever the mind is sensing, feeling, imagining, or thinking. Because one's mind is constantly agitated by information originating from internal or external sources over which one has no control, it is in a state of restlessness. The condition of the mind colors one's self-perception. If one feels agitated or morose, stressful, or helpless, happy or sad, he or she identifies with this particular state of mind. This is by researchers called Malhotra. Anyhow, so we have discussed the nature of the mind, the way it covers one's consciousness, and the struggle to control it. Now, I want to continue and look at the Bhagavad Gita's yoga from a slightly different point of view, and this is the detached yogic view. This is a unique feature of yoga, according to which the yogi observes the mechanics of his or her body and mind, also mind, from a distance, from a detached point of view. So I'll read a little from the 5th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. And here we have this very interesting, detached yogic vision. Who is absorbed in yoga, who is a pure soul, who is self-controlled and has subdued his senses, and who is deeply related to all living beings, is never defiled, even though he acts. I am not really doing anything, reflects the knower of the truth absorbed in yoga, while seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, eating, walking, sleeping, breathing, evacuating, receiving, opening or closing his eyes. He meditates and considers all these as nothing but the senses acting among their sense objects. Very interesting. He who acts without attachment, offering his actions to Brahman, is not tainted by evil, as the lotus leaf is not touched by water. Having cast aside their attachments, the yogis act with their mind, intelligence, body, and even with their senses for the purpose of self-purification. Having given up the fruits of his actions, he who is absorbed in yoga attains deep and lasting peace. However, he who does not maintain the state of mind, who is attached to those fruits and acts out of lust for them, is fettered. When the soul residing in the body renounces all actions mentally, it resides happily and rules the nine-gated city, this is the body, neither acting nor accumulating karma. So that is a very interesting section exemplifying the state of mind of the yogi. He lives in the body, he lives in the mind, but he feels detached. He looks at them as looking at an external phenomenon. It's not him, it's the body, it's the mind, and then that soul, actually, not even the human being, that yogi, that soul resides happily in the nine-gated city, that's the body, neither acting nor accumulating karma. A very interesting vision, which summarizes the position of the yogi by the statement, I'm actually not doing anything. While dwelling in the body, he observes the senses engaged with their objects as if he was observing an external phenomenon. As such, he sees that the senses are driven by the sense objects or seen from a wider perspective by the gunas. We will expand upon this later. The question may be raised as to what obstructs this vision for most people. Why don't we all see that? Apparently, it is the ego or ahankara that erroneously claims experience to be its own and fixes the world as seen from its own limited perspective. In such states, the seer, Purusha, and then the seen, Prakriti, no longer interact in reciprocity. Only the ego is apparent. Anyhow, so that's a description of the higher yogic states and the ahankara, which is obstructing all these states. Now, let us look into the peak of the yoga practice, which is samadhi. Let's look at the samadhi, which is the peak of the yoga practice. This is the state of samadhi, and here we have the researcher Julius Lipner. He considers samadhi as focusing on the object of concentration to the point of perfect mind control and subordinating the mind to the purpose of spirit or Purusha within. Another important researcher, Christopher Chappell, refers to the etymology of the term and writes the final state of Patanjali's Eightfold Yoga scheme. The culmination of the system is referred to as samadhi. This critical term is derived from two prefixes and root word that literally translate as together here putting, or putting things together. It has been rendered absorption, concentration, and unitive attention, but is best defined by Patanjali as a state that emerges from the diminishment of mental fluctuations, like a precious or clear jewel assuming the color of any near object. So these are scholars, important scholars, describing samadhi and looking at this very interesting and deep state, which is the peak of yoga practice. And now I'm reading from the 6th chapter, 18th verse, sharing stream. When a man of his trained consciousness is absorbed in the self alone, devoid of any hint of desire or lust, he is said to be yoked indeed. As the familiar saying goes, the candle flame in a windless place does not flicker. So is it for the yogi of controlled mind, absorbed and focused on the yoga of the self. When consciousness rests peacefully, restrained by practice of yoga, then the self can see itself directly and thus be satisfied within itself. At that time, he knows infinite bliss, experienced by an internal consciousness beyond the senses, firmly established. He deviates not from the truth. Having attained this, he holds no other acquisition greater, and thus situated, even grievous misery does not shake him. Let it be known that the solution of the deep union with misery is called yoga, and it should be practiced with wholehearted self-determination. So that's a very deep, very important section describing the state of samadhi. It describes the stage of pacifying the consciousness through meditation and the state of the self, experiencing itself directly, and subsequently attaining deep inner satisfaction. The state of peaceful consciousness is exemplified through a metaphor. The candle flame, stable in the absence of wind, exemplifies the yogi's consciousness when fixed and free from mental fluctuations. At last, following the state of deep meditation, the peak of yoga practice, that is samadhi, appears. Apparently, the samadhi experience entails not only happiness, but also a grasp of the truth in a non-intellectual and direct way, proceed without the disturbance generally caused by the fluctuations of the mind and senses. So that's very, very interesting to look into the state of samadhi. So now I want to move to the next section, and that is mystical yogic visions. And that's also a very interesting part of the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gītā. When looking at the Bhagavad Gītā, we have some sections that are argumentative. Krishna and Arjuna are talking, Arjuna is presenting a question, and Krishna is answering. Sometimes they argue, Arjuna not necessarily agrees with everything Krishna says. But then we have sections which I consider to be darshanas, just visions, mystical visions. And here we have an exquisite description or darshans, visions of yoga, and that's at the end of, or the middle of the 6th chapter. So I'm reading from 627. The yogi who has brought his mind to serenity indeed attains the highest bliss. His passions pacified. He becomes flawless and completely absorbed in Brahman. The yogi who constantly practices this becomes free from taste, easily approaches Brahman and attains infinite happiness. He who is deeply absorbed in yoga envisions the self as present in all beings and envisions all beings as present in the self. Very interesting vision. He sees the self as present in all beings and envisions all beings as present in the self, a mystical vision. As such, he attains an equal vision under all circumstances. For one who sees me, Krishna speaks, everywhere and sees everything in me, I am never lost, nor is he ever lost to me. He who is absorbed in the vision of oneness and under any circumstances worships me at present in all beings, he is a yogi indeed, and in me does he dwell. He sees Krishna as present in all beings. Or Arjuna, one who in relation to himself sees all beings equally, whether in happiness or distress, is considered the supreme yogi. So these are some very beautiful visions which we hear at this very beautiful chapter, chapter 6 of the Bhagavad Gītā, how the yogi sees the world and sees various experiences, various mystical visions. That happens when the turbulent mind is curbed and restrained and subsequently becomes quiescent. Then it turns into a powerful aid for meditation. At this point, it ceases to obstruct the yogi's progress, and is transformed from a foe to a friend. As the mind stops obstructing the experience of spirituality, various inner experiences, which may well be considered mystical states, appear, and some are herein described. The first is the blissful state that accompanies the experience of Brahman, followed by a unifying experience of an impersonal nature in which spiritual souls are seen everywhere. Very interesting. In another vision, the yogi sees the Supreme Person always and everywhere and sees everything as resting in him. This may well refer to the experience of the Supreme Person in the heart, or Paramatman, who is said to be present everywhere and to support everything. Then we have verse 31, conveys theism, and in this regard, Nicholas Sutton knows that the word bhajati means worship, indicates devotion to God. A personal touch is expressed through the warm relationships between the yogi and the Supreme Person. Stated differently, the kind of yoga described here as notable bhakti or devotional touch. At last, the yogi views all the various entities with equality and in comparison with himself. As such, it seems that the various spiritual or yogic experiences are varied and personal. That is, various yogis may have different spiritual experiences and visions. Not all yogis have the same experiences, but these are various visions and experiences. Now we move to the next section, and this is also it's very interesting. It's a criticism of the system, not only propounding the system, but is also in the Gita criticism of the dhyana yoga system. Okay, so although the Gita promotes 4 types of yoga, it offers a critique of both dhyana yoga and dhyana yoga systems. A critique of the Jnana Yoga system takes place in chapters 3, 4-8, and then 5-6, okay? Whilst the critique of the Dhyana Yoga system appears in the following section. So now I'm reading the critique of the Dhyana Yoga system, and I will share screen. Arjuna said, O Madhusudana, the system of yoga and equanimity you have just propounded seems not founded on firm ground. Because, what's the criticism? The mind is so capricious. Here's a criticism. For the mind is restless, impetuous, mighty, and unyielding. O Krishna, I think restraining it would be as difficult as restraining the blowing wind. The Blessed Lord said, undoubtedly, O mighty arm, the mind is restless and difficult to curb. Still, it can be controlled by the constant practice and detachment. Although I agree that this yoga system is difficult for one whose mind is uncontrolled, it is nevertheless possible for one who strives for such restraint by fitting means. So here we have this criticism. Arjuna is saying that the whole system is based upon curbing or restraining the mind. And he says, I consider it to be too difficult to restrain the mind. The mind is flickering. It's restless, impetuous, mighty, unyielding. How can you restrain it? And Krishna says, still, you can curb it by practicing detachment, by abhyasa and vairagya. So this is a doubt which Arjuna is raising, and his critique is that the mind is too difficult to curb. So then Arjuna raised another question, and that's another very interesting discussion. Arjuna is asking, but what about someone who fails, someone who gives up his material life to practice yoga, but he doesn't make it, he doesn't get liberated, he loses both worlds. So that's another discussion which offers a critique to the yoga system. You may practice yoga, give up material life, but not achieve success in spiritual life, and as such lose both ends. So that's another very interesting critique. And now I'm reading that's 637. Arjuna said, what is the destination of one who follows this path faithfully but without restraining himself? His mind thus deviates from the path of yoga, and so he does not attain the state of perfection. Where will he go? O Krishna, does he not fade away like a driven cloud, losing both worlds, having no solid ground, and straying from the path that leads to Brahman? O Krishna, please dissipate entirely this doubt of mine, as none can dispel it but you. The blessed Lord said, O Partha, not in this world, nor in the next will he meet with destruction. O my friend, for one who does good will never reach an evil destination. So I hope you understand Arjuna's question. He says, what about someone who doesn't attain perfection, and does he not lose on both ends? I try to explain that, and Krishna says, don't worry about that. He will never, one who does good will never reach an evil destination. Now, Krishna explains why. Having attained the worlds of the righteous and dwell therein for endless years, going to Svarga, he who has deviated from the path of yoga is reborn in the in the home of pure and righteous people, or in a prosperous aristocratic family, where it takes a good birth, or else is born into a clan of enlightened yogis. Undoubtedly, such a birth is rare in this world. Hence, he recovers the consciousness gained in his previous life, and from thence he strives again towards perfection. The power of his previous practice attracts him to the path of yoga, sometimes even without his wish, and he desires to know of it. As such, he transcends the words of the Vedas, purify the four evils, and attaining perfection by practicing restraint over many births. He then goes to the supreme goal. So basically, one who practices yoga, even if he or she, they are not successful, they may continue their practice in their next life, and also in the way spend time in Svarga or in other heavenly realms, different routes. So that's a very interesting discussion, a very interesting critique, and a very interesting discussion. Krishna comforts Arjuna and declares that one who does good will never reach an evil fate. One who has exercised yoga and failed to achieve release from samsara will live for many years in the heavenly worlds, and moreover, following this, he or she will be reborn into a good family, perhaps even into a family of yogis. At this time, the dormant spiritual consciousness developed in previous life will awaken, and he will continue his efforts towards liberation from the point at which he has stopped. So that's a very interesting discussion, and that culminates in the statement that the yogi is superior to the ascetic. I'll share screen so you can see that that's the culmination of the chapter, and that is the conclusion of the chapter, chapter 6. The yogi is superior to the ascetic, the yogi is superior to the intellectuals, and the yogi is superior to the performance of rituals. Therefore, O Arjuna, be a yogi. Best is to be a yogi. And of all yogis, he whose inner self is absorbed in me and worships me with faith and love, him I deem to be the best of all yogis. So the best yogi is the bhakti yogi, or the devotee of Krishna, and that is the conclusion of this chapter, having highlighted the superiority of yoga over asceticism, intellectualism, and ritualism. The devotional yoga or bhakti yoga is recommended as an answer to Arjuna's doubts. As a devotional yogi, he will immerse his mind in devotion to the Supreme Person, and thus will be able to restrain and pacify his mind. With his mind restrained in this way, he will no doubt attain success in the difficult path of yoga. Yogi nama pisal visham madgatena talatmana shwadavan bhajate yomam same yuktatam momata. Now, I want to look into the structure of the Bhagavad Gita and that structure is yogic. That's one of the main arguments of my book and of this lecture series, is that underlying the structure of the Bhagavad Gītā is a yoga ladder. But this is not a yoga ladder like Patanjali's yoga ladder, yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, samadhi, but this is a karma yoga ladder. If you, my dear audience, will understand this point, that the Bhagavad Gītā presents or underlying the Bhagavad Gītā is a karma yoga ladder, that I'll be very satisfied. That will be a great achievement of this lecture series. So that's a very central point I'm trying to make. So first, let me try to argue or show that such a ladder exists very clearly in the 12th chapter of the Bhagavad Gītā, although it's not an ascending ladder, but a descending ladder. And I'm reading that. Fix your mind on me alone, and absorb your consciousness in me. Thus you shall surely abide in me. This is the high stage. Now we're going lower. If you cannot fix your consciousness steadily upon me, then aspire to reach me through repeated yoga practice. O Dhananjaya, if you are incapable even of that, embrace the path of action, going lower, for which I am the highest goal, since by acting for me you shall attain perfection. But if you are even unable to follow this path of refuge in me, through acts devoted to me, then give up the fruits of all your actions, thus restraining yourself. Knowledge is superior to practice, meditation is superior to knowledge, and relinquishing the fruits of action is higher than meditation, as tranquility soon follows such relinquishments. So here we have a descending ladder, and this very clearly that demonstrates the ladder principle underlying the entire Bhagavad Gītā. The description here descends from top downwards, and as such covers all three stories or levels in the Gita's metaphysical structure. We'll reach that discussion later when we discuss Jnana, the Upanishadic knowledge of the Bhagavad Gītā. At the top of this ladder stands pure and unalloyed bhakti directed at the Supreme Person. It is characterized by spontaneous devotion and immersion in the Supreme. As it is spontaneous, it does not require support by yogic restraints, and as such it may be called the stage of spontaneous devotion. That's the high stage, spontaneous devotion, bhakti. The next and low stage is yoga practice. This may well refer to bhakti yoga, practicing devotion in a yogic manner, including abhyasa or constant devotional practice, and then vairagya, supporting the practice with renunciation and detachment. The next stage is activity dedicated to Krishna, or devotional karma yoga. This activity seems to be in adherence to dharma. As such, it is performed according to the nature of the performer, and its fruits are offered to the Supreme in devotion. Here we have the famous scholar Zainer, R.C. Zainer, and he's quoting Ramanuja Acharya, who writes that at this stage one may build a temple or park for the Supreme. That will be devotional karma yoga. The next and lower stage is action performed without attachment to its fruits, as opposed to the higher stage, which furthers the offering of action's fruits to the Supreme. This stage furthers only general relinquishment. It may be designated as karma yoga. It is based upon adherence to dharma. It may also be considered dharma yoga. A low stage is meditation, still lower cultivation of knowledge, and eventually there's practice. It does not appear to be yoga practice mentioned as the second step of the ladder, and it will be the practice of the Veda. Okay, so having examined the condensed ethical ladder, we may now examine the full ethical ladder. Now I'm going to demonstrate, to argue, to show the full ethical ladder underlying the Bhagavad Gītā and creating the ladder-like transformational path. So this is now where will it take me? Before going that, I'll make another argument, and I'll quote Edwin Bryant, who considered that he speaks about Kriya Yoga. Kriya Yoga, this is the path of action, and that consists of self-discipline, study, and dedication to the Lord. And he considers that Patanjali's famous yoga ladder is not the only yoga ladder which existed, but there were at least three other yoga ladders, and one being a 6 limbs ladder, and the other being a kind of Kriya Yoga ladder. Anyhow, that argument or that observation is interesting in that Patanjali's yoga ladder is not the only yoga ladder, but there were also other ladders, and there were also action-based ladders, and this is what I'm aiming to show, that this action-based ladder is underlying the Bhagavad Gītā, this Kriya Yoga ladder, not Dhyana Yoga ladder, but Kriya Yoga ladder, this Karma Yoga ladder, and that is a major argument. And this idea of the ethical ladder is grounded in the writings of Vishwanath Chakravarti. He was a Vaishnava author who lived around the years 1640 and 1730. He grew up in present-day West Bengal in the Nadias district, and then he moved to Radhakund in the Mathura district. That was an important center for Vaishnava scholarship. He wrote about 20 books on Vaishnava theology, and the idea of the ladder may be found in his book Sarata Rashini Tika, which is his Gita commentary. So this is a traditional idea, this idea of the Gita, of the ethical ladder underlying the Gita. Vishwanath Chakravarti's ethical ladder is somewhat implicit. However, reading through his commentary, it reveals that such a ladder indeed exists. His ladder consists of 3 main stages: Sakama Karma, Nishkama Karma, and Bhakti. Sakama Karma means literally following the Vedic rules with a desire for some gain. Nishkama Karma means literally following the Vedic rules without a desire for gain. And Bhakti means devotion or love of God. Vishwanath's ethical ladder contains also mixed stages, such as state of devotion mixed with some desire for gain, Mishra, devotion mixed with knowledge or scholasticism, and devotion confined to the realm of one's nature. The idea is further developed in contemporary Vaishnava scholarship. That is a quote by Burijan Das. Okay, so now let us look into the ladder, which, as you already probably understood, I see as one of the 2 major components of the structure of the Bhagavad Gītā. So now I'm going to describe the ladder from ground to top, from down, ascend upward, and we can observe the motivations underlying the various statements. So now I'm starting with the lowest stage of the ladder, and that is called simple utilitarianism. This is Krishna speaking to Arjuna at the 2nd chapter of the Bhagavad Gītā, 234. Besides that, people will be speaking of you as eternally infamous, and for one who has been honored, dishonor is worse than death. The generals will assume that you have withdrawn from the battle out of fear, and thus those who have once esteemed you highly will think little of you. Your ill-wishers will speak many unspeakable words, thus ridiculing your capacity. What could be more distressful than this? So this I consider to be the lowest stage of the ethical ladder, the karma yoga ladder of the Bhagavad Gita, and this is the stage of simple utilitarianism. So why is this, why do I consider this to be simple utilitarianism? Because here Krishna attempts to convince Arjuna to take arms based upon an argument underlaid by simple utilitarianism. He assumes that Arjuna aspires to accumulate gains such as fame and argues that by withdrawing from the battle, Arjuna will lose his social esteem. Very simple. If Arjuna will relinquish the battle, he would just be losing. That's simple utilitarianism. So now we'll go a little higher to the next stage. And this is also a utilitarian stage, but it is slightly higher in that it accepts scriptural authority. As such, it accepts the idea that the warriors who die in the battle, dharmic battle, of course, attain svarga or heaven. So now Krishna refers to the Vedic path of works leading to heaven. Quite early, the Veda, the distinction between karma kanda and jnana karma. Anyhow, I'll leave that. And let's look at this verse, which I see as representing dharmic utilitarianism. It's also utilitarian, but slightly higher. 232. Happy are the kshatriyas, to whom such an opportunity to fight comes by good luck, as it opens heaven's gates for them. So this is still within the realm of utilitarianism, but still there's a calculation of gain and loss, but it's higher in that it involves faith in the Vedic Dharma, according to which warriors who die while fighting to protect Dharma attain heaven or svarga. Okay, so now we're going a little higher. And this is the stage of following Dharma for its own sake, or performing one's duty for the sake of duty. Fight for the sake of fighting, regarding alike happiness and distress, gain and loss, victory and defeat. Thus you shall not incur evil. Sukha dukkha samaya kritva labalabao jayo jayo tato yudhaiva yudyasva naivam papam avapsyasi. Very interesting. So this is a higher stage, third stage of performing one's duty for the sake of duty. That represents a pure mode of action, free from a desire for its fruits, and is one of the central teachings of the Gita. The same idea appears again in a slightly different version in 247, the same stage, and that is Karmani eva dikaraste ma paleshu kadachana ma karma pala heturur mati sangastva karmani. Your sole entitlement is to perform dharmic activity, not ever to possess its fruits. Never shall the fruit of an action motivate your deed, and never cleave to inaction. So that's the same idea of performing dharma without attachment to the fruits of action. So this is a unique stage. It departs from the Vedic ethos by making a significant step towards yoga values and enables a turning of karma into karma yoga. You see, karma, Vedic karma, now turns into a type of yoga, karma yoga. That's very, very interesting. But now Krishna goes higher and higher and starts speaking about the attainment of Brahman. And now we have this verse: as much value as there is in a well when there is a flood of water on all sides, Such is the value of all the Vedas for one who is a knower of Brahman. So here the text goes higher and higher, and it offers a critique of the Vedas, of the Karma Kanda, and it promotes a action for the sake of the highest good, or Brahman. At this stage, one's consciousness is expanded to the highest good, which could be thought of in humanistic terms, but eventually leads to thinking in spiritual terms, having it speak in Brahman or divinity. Arjuna has now been encouraged to relinquish the utilitarian mentality and perform his duty in a yogic state of mind. He has also been encouraged to give the Vedas, at least in the ritualistic emphasis, which is inspired by desire for various fruits. As a substitute, Krishna proposed a different ideal of impersonal divinity named Brahman, a term associated with the Upanishadic world. Okay, so now we are going higher, and the next stage is the stage of yoga. This is clearly grounded in the second story, and I'll explain later what the second story is. This is the story of yoga, characterized by various yoga processes. At this stage, one may act in karma yoga, disinterested in the fruits of actions, may offer those fruits as supreme and practice yoga through action. Alternatively, one may practice jnana yoga, ashtanga yoga, or bhakti yoga. Although the emphasis here seems to be on the practice of karma yoga, now we're speaking about karma yoga, which combines the Vedic Dharma with yoga, or turns Vedic Dharma into yogic practice. At any rate, these various yoga practices have the common goal of detaching oneself from worldly existence and attachments and attaching oneself to the Supreme. That's the same principle of yoga which I've explained at the beginning of this talk, and here we can see it exemplified through the karma yoga practice. So now we have the stage of yoga characterized by enlightenment and renunciation. Let's look at this verse. The enlightened renounces both good and bad evil deeds here in this world, therefore performing yoga for the sake of yoga, as yoga is the skill in action, your karma sukho shalam. So this is the stage of yoga. This is characterized by abhyasa and vairagya. This intertwines devotion and yoga, or makes devotion into a yogic practice, bhakti yoga. This indicated in 14:26, and one who serves me constantly through the yoga of devotional bhakti, unswervingly and without going astray, he transcends these gunas and attains the state of Brahman. So this is a bhakti yoga. And we have some split here. And from my point of view, you can read the Gita in a devotional, dualistic way, but you can also read the Gita in an impersonal, Advaita, following Shankara. That's also a possibility. Although I personally, I'm inclined toward the devotional reading, such as Ramanuja's Vishishta Advaita, but I respect also the reading of the Bhagavad Gītā in the line of Shankara's Advaita Vedanta. So here's another example. He whose happiness is within, whose pleasure is within, and his enlightenment too is within. He's actually a yogi. With his whole being absorbed in Brahman, he attains extinction to Brahman. But we can also see the peak of the yoga ladder in the devotional version of the yoga. Always think of me and become my devotee, worship me and pay homage unto me. Thus yoke to me and intent on me as your highest goal, you shall come to me. And that brings the ladder to its peak and culminates the internal journey of self-transcendence, leading one all the way from utilitarianism through duty for its own sake to action for the sake of the highest good of Brahman, to the stage of yoga, and then to the state of moksha in its personal or impersonal version. So that summarizes this lecture, and I hope you saw this very major structure underlying the Bhagavad Gita. Although the ladder-like structure is clear, some stages are parallel and there are possible varieties. The raw stages are clear. These are simple utilitarianism, dharmic utilitarianism, and duty for its own sake. From this point, there seems to be an expansion into parallel options, which are all within the realm of the second story, the theory of yoga. At this stage, one can make progress through a variety of options, but the main course is clear, and it is karma yoga that gradually turns into bhakti yoga and eventually spontaneous bhakti. Although the Gita recommends time and again the path of karma yoga over jnana yoga, it still approves jnana yoga as a path into perfection. As such, practitioners who are more inclined toward jnana are also inspired by the ethical ladder, although from their point of view, the peak of realization would be attaining an impersonal state of Brahman. A wider look shows that an ethical ladder of motives is formed, according to which the higher one's motives for action is, the higher one is situated in the Bhagavad Gita's metaphysical structure. As mentioned, the unique characteristic of this ladder is that throughout the various stages, the dharma is always to be adhered to and followed. In other words, it further spiritual realization and an internal process of self-transcendence while maintaining social stability and protecting dharma. In this way, the Gita aspires to encompass the entire realm of existence while encouraging all to ascend the ethical ladder of sublimating motives, thus distancing oneself from samsara and absorbing oneself in Brahman, either personally or impersonally. So I conclude here. I try to look into the various aspects of yoga in the Bhagavad Gita. I try to argue for the mind being the focal point of yoga, that the Bhagavad Gita adheres to the principles of yoga, chitta, vritti, nirodha, that the mind and its restraint are the focal points. I looked into some mystical visions. I also wrote Arjuna's critiques of the yoga system and Krishna's answer, basically saying that better to perform devotional yoga. And at last, I demonstrated the karma yoga ladder of the Bhagavad Gita, which is an ethical ladder of motives, sublimating one's motives in a yogic way, stage by stage, leading all the way from a utilitarian point of view, all the way up to, through a yogi point of view, to a devotional point of view. So, thank you very much.